Hey everyone, this is Paul. Welcome to Common Touch of Fantasy. Today we're going to talk about recommendations, and in specific, recommendations for new fantasy readers. This is part of a series. Today is going to be new fantasy reader recommendations, and then I'm going to do one for expert fantasy readers, and then I'm going to do one for veteran fantasy readers. Disclaimer, I have not read all the books I'm about to show. I've read quite a few of them, but I have not read all of them. But these are the books that I own that I feel like are great introductions to the fantasy genre. And I'm going to start going from the youngest age book to highest age book. So if you have a young kid, someone under 10, I would start with the following books, and then as I progress in the books that I'm about to show, I'll also progress with the age of the books that they're appropriate for. Okay? Alright, so the first book I'm going to talk about is, Tolkien's The Hobbit. I recommend this book to younger readers and beginner fantasy readers. It's an easy read, it's relatively short, and it also has a connection to the movies, and I think when children are starting to read, there needs to be more of a connection for them to encourage them to read. So that's my first recommendation for a younger child reading. Next, I would recommend them read the Harry Potter books. The Harry Potter books are really good. There's a reason why, 8-year-olds read them, but also 50-year-olds read them. Don't listen to the criticism with J.K. Rowling. People like to be negative towards people that are successful. But J.K. Rowling is a decent writer, and when these books were super popular, people talked about how she was a bad writer, but she's really not a bad writer. And I definitely recommend the entire Harry Potter series to new fantasy readers. Great introduction to fantasy, with great characters and great plot. Alright, next would be more of the middle grade books. The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. I'd recommend that to this age range and for newer fantasy readers. What's great about this is that the main character is female. And there's not a whole lot of introductory fantasy books with female characters. There is an aspect of this, especially in the later book, of anti-established religion, so be wary of that if you're religious. But at the same time, I believe that it is a good book to read even if you are religious, so check that out. And then I would suggest maybe the Chronicles of Narnia also. This is more for younger kids, but if you didn't like the idea of the anti-religion thing and the Golden Compass, then the Chronicles of Narnia would be great. This is a great introductory fantasy read for religious kids. It's a great introduction for anyone, actually. And I definitely suggest the Chronicles of Narnia. C.S. Lewis is an amazing writer, and I think that that's a good place to start. Next one I'm going to talk about is The Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. This is the first book in the Belgeriad series. I believe this is a great book to start people that are starting to read fantasy, because it introduces you to what fantasy books are all about. An evil sorcerer, a good wizard, a young boy that becomes something greater than what he was. And even though people are negative towards those tropes, this is what fantasy is about. It's about starting humble and becoming important. And that really relates to young kids, because sometimes young kids, they don't get along in school, and when they read something about someone their age becoming powerful, becoming a wizard, becoming a knight or something like that, it gives them confidence in themselves that they can do whatever they want, that they can face like bullies in school and stuff like that too. And then the next books, this is where I started reading fantasy. First is the Dragonglass Chronicles by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. It's a trilogy. The first book is Dragons of Autumn Twilight. I recommend this book and the next book, which is R.A. Salvatore, because there's such a strong correlation between these books and role-playing games. And if you have a child that is a gamer, or if you yourself is a video gamer and you're younger and you just haven't really gotten into reading much, I find that these books are really easy to compare with playing a video game, because there's like classes in these books, and there's like rules that are game-like. Because they're based off of D&D, it's very familiar to a lot of gamers. So I would definitely recommend those. R.A. Salvatore, the Dark Elf trilogy, and then the Icewind Dale trilogy are the first books. I would actually recommend the Dark Elf trilogy before the Icewind Dale trilogy. I think it's a better introduction to the main character, Drizzt. And that's what I did as well. I read that book first. Okay, next books that I'm going to recommend are the Garth Nix, the Aborson trilogy. The first book is Sabriel. These are middle grade fantasy books, a lot of magic, a lot of female characters, and I think it's a great place for middle grade or even young adult fantasy readers to start. Say you're a little bit older, say you're maybe in your teenage years, maybe 15 or 16, 17, around there. I would start with like Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I'm currently reading this. This shows off world building to young fantasy readers, and it shows off different types of a magic system to young readers. And I think they really can relate to this book just because the main character is a younger girl, and the writing is relatively easy to read and it flows extremely well. Sanderson is one of the best at writing strong scenes and strong dialogue, and then the next portion is another strong scene, and so it goes from strong scene to strong scene. There's not a whole lot of like messiness in between scenes, and he's just really good at that. And also Patrick Rothfuss, The Name of the Wind, same thing. Patrick Rothfuss books, the King Clear Chronicle books, they're great for younger readers because they flow relatively well, and you can read large chunks of it without getting tired of reading. It's an anti-daydreaming, anti-wanting to go do something else type of book, and that's great for younger kids that might be a little bit restless, especially for like a teenager that is sitting down to read and he's like, I just want to go on the internet, check my Facebook, and go play a video game. But once you get stuck in reading this, you'll just keep reading, and before you know it, a bunch of time has passed, and they'll just love it. Another book I'm going to recommend for younger readers, and this is kind of the one of the foundational books of fantasy. It is the Sword of Shannara trilogy, and the first book being the Sword of Shannara, Shannara by Terry Brooks. These are kind of talked about being a Tolkien clone. Before this, there wasn't a whole lot of huge fantasy deals and money going into the fantasy market. Everyone wanted to be the next big Tolkien, and Terry Brooks is the one that broke through. He's the one that made it so that other fantasy authors could be put on the shelves next to the bestsellers. So I recommend those books. Let's see. The last couple books I'm going to recommend. The first one is The Lies of Lamora by Scott Lynch. Whoops. Recommend this to older, newer fantasy readers. It introduces the reader to more of a focused narrative, not this huge overarching plot of the entire world, but more of a focused narrative, and I think that's good for younger fantasy readers to read, because it introduces them more to the sword and sorcery aspect of the fantasy genre. And if they enjoy this, they might enjoy other books that are more sword and sorcery and the less like epic fantasy. And the last book I'm going to recommend for newer fantasy readers is Jim Butcher's Stormfront. It's the first book in the Dresden Files, and this is urban fantasy. And if you're not into urban fantasy or you never tried it before and you're a newer reader, I'd recommend Dresden File books because there's a strong element of mystery and detective work in these. Basically, it's a wizard as a detective, and he has to solve crimes that other wizards and other supernatural beings commit. It's very interesting. So, if you've never read an urban fantasy book, I would recommend the Dresden Files. Alright, so this has been my recommendations for new fantasy readers. There's a lot of books here. So, you know, if you're looking to give a book to a son or a daughter, you know what to give them. If you're a teenager and you're looking to read something, or if you're a brand new fantasy reader, a lot of these books is a great place to start. Alright, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it was kind of informative. Please subscribe, like, and comment, and everyone have a nice day, and I'll be back with another video, and that one will be for expert fantasy readers, and then the last one will be for veteran fantasy readers. Alright guys, thank you, take care.